Hi everyone. This is the wow, it's February already. This is February 14th, a special Valentine's Day edition of SIG API Machinery. We have 3 things on the agenda, so good. Amir?
Hi.
Hi. What do you want to talk about?
Sorry, I'm Amir. Okay.
Should we come back to this one? Okay, let's come back to this one. It sounds like Amir is having connection difficulties.
Oh no, sorry, I'm here. I just was waiting for whether I should start.
Yeah, go ahead and start, please.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so this is my first time attending these meetings, and I made a mistake, and I wasn't aware that I have to share the proposal document with the mailing list and ask for comments before. So I don't think if anybody has read the document yet, and I don't also think many people need introduction to the concepts that's in the proposal.
Can you talk louder? I can't hear you.
Sorry, just. Is now any better?
Yes, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, sorry. And yeah, as I said, so I don't think there's the motivation behind this proposal needs much talking about. Is just I hope to get the ball rolling on this subject, and also to fix the issues that we are facing at the moment. So just to quickly going over why we want to do this is.
Amir, can you give us like a 30-second, like 3-sentence description of what this is?
What it is that
Kubernetes. I'm not following your explanation.
So what it is that Kubernetes is already providing a Swagger an open API definition, and I think that definition generally, the Swagger definition generally for people is either used for it could be used for generating browsable and dynamic interactive documentations, and at the same time you would be able to generate robust clients with it, and also use it for generating test cases for your clients or your server. And I think the current Swagger it serves the purpose of documentation very well, but the situation on the testing and the client-side generation could be slightly improved, and this proposal is trying to do that. Is that clear?
I mean, we use the Open API spec to generate clients right now.
Yeah, but as I said, like we are facing some issues, and it's mostly on validating the stuff, and also the most important being the validating stuff on client side. So I think the only property that is being generally used in Swagger is to identify whether a property is optional or not, but many other things could be expressed in Swagger as well. Like you could say the possible values of a field, or the default value. If it's a string, what could be the maximum number length of the string? If it's an integer, what's the maximum for that value? Or you could also provide formats and patterns for a string. So say the value should match this pattern. But most of these are lacking at the moment.
So I agree that I agree with about 80% of those items. Yeah.
So basically, if I understand correctly, you want us to be able to specify open API validation, whatever open API validation is available in our types.go file. Is that
Yeah, true. That's like I was trying like I saw two generally like this is not a problem that only we have. Like I've seen in GitHub issues, people having this issue regularly, and the solutions that already exist is either having a manually wrapper that you have to maintain yourself and inject those information, that's validation criteria, in this step from, say, from Swagger to JSON schema. I think it's something like Fabricate is doing, or other approaches is like something that we would like to do, that it's a set of JSON patches that would inject that information, the type information, into the Swagger. But like I wanted to improve the situation and have those validation specification inside the Swagger, the official Swagger. So I found I found the Cube Open API project, and I opened an issue and I submitted a PR and started talking with Mehdi about how we could improve it. And he said that he's open to the improvements, but he would like to formally like come up in a way that we are not we would be able to reuse the validation semantics which is already present in Kubernetes source code. So we're not duplicating efforts or duplicating code. So I have so these proposal came after that his requirement to formally verify what we want to add to the Kubernetes. And there are a couple of recommendations in this proposal. They are in the type of gists and GitHub, and they are heavy on reflection. So not very heavy on reflection, but kind of user reflection to see whether those types are already in Kubernetes source code, and reusing those validations or the enum values that are already present in Kubernetes.
So CRDs support OpenAPI V3 validation. Are you saying that you want to, instead of generating validation for core API types, you want to have the validation also come from an OpenAPI?
No, I think the proposal is about adding static validation to the OpenAPI spec. Like if we know a string conforms to a regex, put that in the spec. If we know there's a minimum and maximum value on it, put that in the spec. So I actually think there's two kinds of validation. There is that sort of validation, which you can express like this, statically, and there's another kind of validation which you can't really express statically, like the maximum number of environment variables depends on the number of containers in this other pod. Like that sort of thing has to be done programmatically.
So you're suggesting as much as possible of our Go coded validation should be moved to the OpenAPI. And you're saying we could stack it when it doesn't fit an OpenAPI as an additional validation.
I think Eric is talking, but I'm having trouble hearing him.
Yes, I'm sorry. Our microphone situation is not great.
So it is Eric. Okay.
May I try one more time?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Are you suggesting that we would move currently Go language validation to be OpenAPI where possible, and then whatever is a residual would remain in Go code?
So no, I think the if I can put my own gloss on this proposal, I think the ideal version of this is that in our Go types definition, we specify anything that can be statically validated. We specify that with a new tag, and then our generator, which currently generates OpenAPI spec, puts that in the OpenAPI spec in the correct way, and also constructs the Go source code that we have today.
For validating those stats.
For validating the things which can be validated statically.
Would that be the same validating function that's used for CRDs, or something different from core?
CRD go through validation. We don't have the static like Go validation for CRDs. They can't do that.
Correct, but they do have OpenAPI validation.
Yes, you would have to validate the CRDs.
I think it's a question of what drives what, right? So for the types we have, the native types, if you drive static validation off of annotations on fields or tags on fields, then that can both generate open API documentation and generate validation.
Yeah, that's what I just suggested.
Yeah, for CRDs, we don't. It's being driven by the open API validation spec. So it's
correct.
What the source of the validation is.
So there is some open issues though to change that to tag. Conversations have just started this past week about dynamically generating the open API spec based on tags on some of the code. So
yes, I would like to do more of that, and I would like to lint the tags, lint the API definitions to try and help people to get the tags correct.
Yeah, I put in that pull request earlier this week for that dynamic generation, and it seems like there's kind of some overlap here between the two.
I am curious what the intended use for client-side validation is.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to be curious about, because especially the one thing I didn't agree with is putting defaults in the open API spec. I think we definitely do not want clients inserting their own defaults. We want the server to insert defaults.
One thing that we've seen around validation especially is that evolving an API can sometimes mean relaxing validation and allow additional values in the future. And that can be done if the API servers that are doing the validation agree on what the new allowed set of things is. But if you have clients that are doing their own client-side enforcement, that you can get cases where a client will refuse to handle something thinking it's invalid when the actual API server and the kubelets are dealing with values.
Yeah, this is why it's better to have the server do the validation too.
Right. So if we're wanting to provide validation rules in Open API, we should be clear like what this should be used for and should not be used for. And I'm actually not sure what valid uses would be.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous. I think the valid use is that the client can editors can like provide hints to the user. Like it's not useful for Kubecontrol to stop you from submitting a config object before you send it to the server.
Yeah, but the same very similar arguments exist for an editor that is trying to give you field level editing powers and help if the same risks apply, right?
Yeah, but it's less destructive, right?
And then also in the KSonic project, I would love to have better validations.
Well, and so we're doing API validation with custom resource definition. So whatever motivating reasons went into that would probably also be motivating reasons for this for native type.
That's done server side. We're not distributing that responsibility to all clients. So yes, the server should absolutely be able to validate what is submitted to it. But as soon as you distribute that responsibility to clients, especially if it's clients generated from a point-in-time version of an open API spec, you run the risk of clients not applying validation correctly or being pinned to an old version of what was allowed. And not.
I'd like to time box this, so let's do 4 more minutes on this topic. And also, there's a lot of people who want to say something, so let's go one at a time.
Is another aspect of the proposal saying that you'd like to validate the pattern matches for strings, but currently a pattern match is opaque? There's no way to say that. What I'm really trying to say is that this has to be like GNS format. It seems like that's a shortcoming of the JSON schema specification, which is embedded in the OpenAPI v3, but it doesn't provide a way to provide a comment about a pattern match saying what its intent is. And this question is for the proposer.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
I think Eric is asking if having a regex in the validation field is the desired state, or if having a regex and also a comment. This regex.
One thing I want to add is that when I said client-side validation, I didn't really I think I should be more clear on that. And what I meant is it would be very good for property-based testing. So when you have a client that you wanted to, in your state of your application, you want to test every possible combination of values, it would be very helpful if you could just run hundreds of thousands of tests and see whether the like whatever logic that you have on your side is sound and is correct before sending it to the server. But
you can use this for fuzz testing.
Sorry?
You could use this for fuzz testing, generating lots of objects that are...
It's for property-based testing. And for the case for existing, having both the regex as a format and also a pattern in there, is that like some languages which have better type system, like a more strong type system, you could also have like refined types. So the idea is that we could have a refined type which gets translated to the host languages, whatever type system that it provides. So you could have said that a string is of type DNS label, and also you could have regular expression which could be used for validation for whatever.
All right, let me ask you, what action or what were you hoping to get out of this meeting? Were you hoping?
My hope was to get mentorship or help to get this and reach the official Swagger JSON of Kubernetes to have as much possible as those validation requirements that we could put in there.
Okay. Let's. I know I have people here who are interested and probably would be willing to help you with this. So let's sync up. You can send me an email or we can chat in the Slack channel after the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next time we talk, I would like to have a clear indication of whether and how we would try to use tags in our API types to validate information server-side, and how it's going to interact with the server-side internal versions that do not match the externals. So that's a concrete question I have that wasn't answered in the proposal.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
So
yeah,
just as a note, next time we talk about it, I'd like to know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think for stuff like this, we might want to introduce a custom of like sending these out in advance and getting feedback before we discuss them at the meeting. This is the first time I've seen this document. And it's hard to discuss it too intelligently if you haven't read it. Okay, Stefan.
Yeah, so I added a link to a proposal from some months ago, I think already, about adding context to our clients. It was discussed by some people. If you go to the proposal, maybe that's a PR, second link.
Yeah, sorry. Got it. This one.
And as I recall, this was the API level context that allows sort of tracing through your API calls.
Yeah, to implement stuff like open tracing, but also to time out requests. So the usual pattern is, so I voted in our agenda, so to have a first argument called context. That's pretty common in other libraries. We don't have that. We might want to have that, but of course it breaks all client calls of third-party library of users of our client Go.
Yeah,
and of course the internal code. But
we don't really do that every single release.
Yeah, but this is a pretty global change, I guess. So we might upset users with that. And the question is, yeah, what should we do? Should we do the long-term solution and really add this parameter, or try to be more defensive or more, using a with context prefix or something like that?
It also, I have another question about this. Are we going to be trying to plumb information from this context, which, as I recall, it is effectively a series of nested maps? Are we going to be trying to add information from it to the actual HTTP requests that are going over the wire?
If we want to use open tracing, probably.
I think eventually, yeah, that would have to be the goal. The hard part of this is the interface change.
I mean, if the originating call is from a user, then if they don't care about open tracing or timeout or cancellation, then they don't need to use context. I kind of like the with context approach. And if everything we generate makes use of that and plumbs something through, then if you provide a context at the entry point, then you can use open tracing and cancellation and timeout capabilities. And if you don't, then you don't care about those things.
So Walter and I talked about this for the controller manager or the cloud provider change, which has just recently had its interface change to support context. Walter somehow convinced me that it was proper to use context as the first parameter of the call.
It's actually in the Golang context library. It specifies that it should be the first variable in the method signature.
So I guess I see three options here. Like we can do it the way the documentation says we should do it. We can do it with a additional optional method that doesn't break the interface for existing clients, or we can just not do it at all. I think the use case here is more for controllers or things that are in the middle of a request than it is for,
but you don't know who is using Client Go, right? Like we make heavy bit in the Kube Controller Manager. So if this were in the Kube Control Manager, it would be very useful for us overall.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like the use case, like the primary people that this would be useful for is controllers or people who are kind of in the middle of a flow. So it's useful for that. Do end users have a burning need for this? I actually don't know the answer to that. Maybe it's something we could like attempt to survey Client Go users.
Do you wish to be broken, or do you wish to never have the information you need to actually trace what's going on?
Yeah, I mean,
horrible choices.
So the good thing is that the context, I mean, the compiler will warn you. And if we add the context, everybody has to update, which means the ecosystem will do it everywhere. If you make it optional,
that's a very good point. That's what I talked Walter into doing for the cloud provider, is just mechanically use context.todo at every call site. Very trivial, like mechanical change.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is once it's there, I think there's benefits that we can get. I mean, for instance, if we can convince, even if it's just other control plane clients to use context and to tell us at what point to give up on a request, this gives us better options when we're overloaded. So, oh, these 4 pending requests now cannot be satisfied because I've exceeded the timeout, so I can just stop working on them. And now I can, the API server can try and do things like better recover.
Yeah, it would be pretty nifty if we could start using features different from this in the API server.
You know, but
especially when we have like.
Well, by default, I thought the context information, I thought we added a context deep in maybe Krause added one deep down in like request.go in the client to be able to pull through a timeout client side.
Yeah, we already have timeout capability. Yeah. I'm interested how this additional mechanism would layer in on top of that.
Is that threaded through the server? Because it would be pretty nifty if like the user provides a timeout and say we allow a long time that we cancel abort.
We allow both, so they can request a timeout on their request, saying timeout my request after a max minimum of this. And then they also have a client-side timeout that can be set for, if I don't get an answer in this timeout, return control.
Yeah, those parameters confuse every single person that looks at them.
I mean, I'm not going to say they don't, but we actually do have those particular capabilities.
Yeah.
I would suggest context. I mean, but that's the sort of thing context is meant to fix, right? It is meant to be a standardized API for how to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. All right.
Regarding this change, what's the downside of just creating new methods?
Chao was asking, what's the downside of just creating new methods and leaving the existing ones? What do you call the new methods?
Just ugliness, I think. Create with context, something like that.
So it has to be per request, right? So it would be like get with context, update with context. Am I am I misconstruing that? It does have to be.
Yes.
No, that's
Yes,
how it
yes.
would have to work. It would be.
Yeah. So
It's double the size of all of our interfaces, right? Yes.
I mean, what we also could do, we could add something to the client set, 2 versions of the APIs.
I mean, let's think about the general problem here, which is, do we provide a complete set of our functions for every field that we add? Like, that's going to make our interfaces just grow every time we want to do anything. It doesn't seem like a healthy approach to.
Well, so some of the techniques of the like do anything list of functions at the end of the call, that's not suitable for context because the recommendation for context is first arg.
Yes. So in my mind, we're weighing the benefits of being able to use context and the like timeout and tracing features in a standard way versus the cost to users of mechanically fixing their code at some point when they upgrade.
So context, in the future, context may provide other benefits too other than just timeout and tracing. Like right now, the use case for context is tracing.
I mean, it's just generally useful. Yes, there may be other benefits. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I mean, the other
most of the use cases that I see context being used for outside of tracing and timeout and cancellation are typically like bucket of parameters that was easier than actually adding a parameter to the interface. And I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. It's also supposed to allow for some, I mean, this is more for us than the client, but it's supposed to allow for things like easy detection that require another required HTTP call that you have made has failed, and so that this one can then, this part of the call, you know, in a parallelized request pattern, that this one can also then just give up.
It's also used for correlation IDs for like logging and stuff, like logger with context.
But yeah, I agree. The random bucket of variables that you can pass hidden just seems like a bad pattern.
So how are we going to make this decision? I suggested a survey. I don't particularly care for that pattern, but I don't have a better suggestion.
Well, so I guess okay. I was gonna say, like, if we can make a strong case for we would use it for tracing, which, as I recall, was the origin of this particular thing. Mm-hmm. Someone was having a lot of trouble trying to trace, like, what happens when my request comes in.
It would be pretty handy.
We are a pretty potent consumer of it, right? We use it in our controllers. We use it inside of our API server. We use it inside of the kubelet. Scheduler, proxy, DNS, they all use it.
Yep.
And so if we need the ability to provide better tracing on our components, this is the way to do it, right?
Yeah, this is decide and announce, not poll and react.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to make a decision, I'd say we should just go ahead and add it as the first argument to all of our calls.
I'm also going to suggest that, you know, as the one who caused this problem, if cloud provider is already pushing a change like this through that some people may have to, you know, some clients may have to modify, you don't want to come the quarter later and be oh, you're doing this to me too. Why does Kubernetes always do this to me?
So you're saying it's a good time to do this if we're going to do it?
Yeah, I think this is if we're going to do it, I think this is rip the Band-Aid off time.
Yeah, I can buy that.
How about we send out an email to API Machinery? Stefan, you're the one that put it on the agenda.
I can do that and make a poll or ask for people who are against it.
Ask for comments and lay out the benefits, both now and short-term and mid-term benefits, and have them actually come in and argue, no, I don't want to have features in Kubernetes or in my code to be able to have some future tracing, and actually see them argue that in the thread. Otherwise,
I think that's a good approach. We have a history of adding things to client Go, which breaks everybody, and there's a horde of angry people with pitchforks and torches.
I can't remember his name. Where's the guy that comes?
It would be good to have give the angry horde something to do before we break them all, so that they can get that out of their system before they discover it accidentally. When
Matt Farina, make sure go ahead and Andy at Heptio, because both of them are users with comments, and I think Andy will be reasoned, and Matt will want to know what's coming.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to argue that we shouldn't do this.
Yep.
Just like the argument against it is, but then I'll have to go do work, which I have a little bit of sympathy for people who.
Yeah. So.
Sounds like a plan. So I will write your mail so that everybody knows and can react if you want.
Let's start the discussion in API Machinery. We'll work it out there, and then once we've kind of reached agreement, then good communication with like Kubernetes Devel, probably Kubernetes Devel.
Yeah, but I am in favor of making the change, and I am also a consumer that's going to have to go update a bajillion call sites.
Yeah, Eric has something to say.
So, if this is beneficial, then wouldn't it also be beneficial to like Python and Java clients? But in that case, how would context be expressed for other language clients? I'm confused as to how we can be sort of open about languages and say this is beneficial to everyone.
Well, so far, we're just talking about in process. We're not talking about crossing process boundaries, like an API point where you could inject like a request ID or something. I guess I don't know enough about the language-specific clients we generate to know if there's a convention for those.
Yeah, like the context pattern is a Go language-specific pattern. So I'm not sure if analogs exist in.
I don't think they do, but I think that, and it may have to be something we would build for each language, but I mean, obviously if we want to have things like timeouts that are going to cross the boundaries, which they should.
Yeah, there's already a query parameter for that, as David was saying.
Oh, no, there is, but I mean, if we want it to show up in the context, it has to be properly encoded in the HTTP request to be interpreted as a context.
To be clear, there's two layers of this problem. One is, and the one that we're discussing here is, what do we do to Go language consumers of the Go client? The other question is, how do we enable these, what standards do we need to support to enable like open tracing or something? So just two different problems.
Okay, let's make sure we don't have the client Go completely outstrip the other language capabilities. Thanks.
We already violated that one.
Okay, let's not make it worse.
Yeah, but we're not talking about, at least this would allow us to add stuff to the API, but this change is not about changing the API. They're probably going. Eventually, yeah. And we can worry about that.
I'm pretty sure. Daniel, you're not on mic again. I'm pretty sure you were saying this change is about making updates inside of a process. It is not about trying to create an external way to pass a context UID.
Right. We're changing the client interface, not the API.
Yep.
Yeah. And eventually we probably will want to change the API, but
add to the API. Change to the API is going to terrify people. Add to the API.
Sure. Okay, let's go on to the next topic. I know there's been a bunch of email threads. Okay, Mehdi is going to come talk about this.
So basically, for this one, I added a section to the design doc for the timeline. What I want to get out of this meeting is to see if we can agree on the first part of the timeline, that is 1.10, that is implementing only the alternative version field. It's useful for promoting versions without change from alpha to beta or beta to stable. If there's no change or if there's only added fields, the users like Istio can benefit from this a lot. They can do the live updates from one version to another. If there's no change, it's just promoting from one version to the other.
So I can say for myself, I haven't completely read this document yet, and so at best I could only give a provisional agreement to that. I don't know if other people are in that boat or not.
I have reservations about trying to add it at this point. We're less than a week out of Code Slush, and I'm not. This is a significant change in direction, right? So we started out the discussion with one kind of webhook. We moved to a different kind of webhook, and this is a third iteration. I think the discussion is good, but at this stage, I don't know that I'm convinced that we can settle a design, because we haven't yet. And I'm not sure that an API that we design now would even survive its contact next quarter with the step 2 that we would want it to.
So immediately before this meeting, Eric and Mehdi and I were talking, and I think we actually will have a proposal for a slightly different API than is currently in the document.
But I think we all believe that it's possible to do an API that.
I can't hear Eric.
To your last comment, Mehdi, Daniel, and Eric believe that it's possible to do something that will survive contact, and we look forward to sharing. Mehdi looks forward to sharing those thoughts very shortly.
Yes.
Is that specifically regarding the no conversion approach, or is this a whole up, like holistic, including conversion?
We believe that there's possible to design an API that supports 3 different categories. One is, we'll call the null conversion, which is common. The next is a renaming type of declarative conversion. And the third one is like complex conversion that requires a webhook. We think all 3 of those use cases can be covered with one API.
And I think that even in that one, we should have something like an alternative version that is list of versions. I can talk more on that, but I think it's supporting this alternative version will survive any of the design proposals that we have right now.
Well, so okay, let's just take the simplest case, right? Let's say you want a list of alternative versions. So you say, you know what, we have a list of alternative versions. The simplest possible thing for me to do, make a string field, a slice takes alternative versions, and then we store in one version and we have alternates and maybe a preferred. Then along comes the idea of declarative conversion, mapping one field to another.
So I don't think we're going to make that particular mistake.
Okay, so
an alternative version can be defined in one of 3 ways. Way 1 is that it's identical to the primary version. Way 2 is that it differs only through like stamp transformations that are equivalent to, like, the declarative is like saying transform a schema, a base schema. And the third way is to say it's a totally different schema, trust me. And this webhook will help us get the data there.
So if I can make a procedural note, I think we should use this. We should not be doing designs in this meeting. We should do designs in smaller meetings with more targeted groups of people, and that's easier. This isn't a good forum for design.
Kind of quiet compared to Eric. I think what you don't want to try to design it out here.
Yeah, I don't think this
meeting. But on the other hand, without some sort of design, I'm a knack, right? Like,
yeah, this is where I'm going. Is this isn't a good meeting for designing this. So the only possible way that we can give a decision here is by delegating that, giving some people or group of people the ability to say yes on the SIG's behalf later on in the week when we have a concrete design. I don't see it.
I mean, from my perspective, that's you and I, and I'm certainly willing to see it and look at it. It's just that a week from Code Slush, this is a significant kind of decision to try to make.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
And like I'm looking at it, I'm not sure what forces are strongly pushing on this.
So
I'll certainly.
I was not looking to actually get the whole design here or approved. I was just hoping that we can just agree on the first part. And for the implementation, I think Stefan has an implementation right now for something like that. It's very similar.
So just to call out like a proof of concept that demonstrates a couple storage versions is one thing, but as soon as you talk about allowing multiple versions in, making sure that we can make guarantees around the whole life cycle is incredibly important. So as soon as things become mutable, like being orderly in how we manage changing it and then changing it back or orphaning versions in storage, I really want to make sure we're careful around the changes we allow so we don't end up with data that's persisted that we don't know what to do with.
But here we are not changing any storage or anything. This is just, the first part is just aliases. I don't understand how it's related to the storage version.
The point is you have to store a version in the etcd, and we can change it, we can mutate it.
We'll
it's not
always
clear.
The main version. So these alternative versions are just...
He's talking about the version of this custom reception, not the defined type.
I know. What I'm saying is there's a version in the configuration and there are alternative versions. The version is the one that we are actually storing, not the alternative version. Those are just aliases to the storage version or the main version.
So I'm going to propose that we have a follow-up meeting just about this later on.
Yeah.
Because we're clearly discussing the design.
Yep.
I think we're ready to say yes or no about this.
I do want to make a point. David asked what the pressing need is. I just wanted to make the point that many users are using CRDs already in production on their own behalf, and others are avoiding CRDs in favor of aggregated API servers, specifically because of the lack of support for versioning. So it is a critical feature. I do want to do the right thing and not the most expedient thing, so I certainly appreciate that, but this is not an academic exercise, it's to solve real-world cases.
Sure, but it sounds like what's being proposed for 110 is mostly a cosmetic thing. Like it lets you change versions as they appear externally, but not actually do the difficult things that versioning is typically done to enable. So
multiple users have told us that matters to them. Should I get them to mail the list and say so everyone can hear it?
No, like I said, promoted without changes is a thing that we do, but implementing that before we know how we're going to do the actual parts that are difficult seems short-sighted.
That's the users we're talking to, that's their most pressing need. And so should we implement features in order of users' need?
I think the argument isn't that we shouldn't implement it, it's that we shouldn't go down a cul-de-sac on our way to implementing it.
We'll have to wait 4 months if we are really cautious.
But no, I mean, let's be fair, right? It's not like this proposal has languished. It's had good discussion on it. It's been through several iterations. It's been actively worked. No one's trying to halt it or slow walk it. It's just that it's different very often, and it reduces confidence that we would get an API last minute correct. And yes, I am definitely open to follow-up discussion for a design to see if we can find something that we think is going to have longevity.
Great.
I just wanted to make sure that it was clear at this meeting.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
All right, I will contact people or have Mehdi set up a follow-up meeting, and people can stay in Slack if they think they need to have a case, and the SIG can trust that David and I are not going to sign up for something that we don't think is a good idea for the health of the project. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. We are almost out of time. I have started circulating a design for moving kube control apply into various aspects of the control plane, the server. So I will probably be sharing that with this SIG and probably the app SIG or CLI SIG, and probably SIG architecture will have something to say about it. But look for that soon. Any other brief announcements? All right, we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you.